Good morning. I guess it's morning for us today. It's a little bit strange, but welcome back to the digital stage. Today, we are joined by Maria Robles Gonzalez, co-founder of Send It Social. Send It Social is a social media agency that specializes in helping museums tell their stories online. Her passion for museums and digital storytelling has taken her from the Smithsonian to the Bayeux Museo. I don't know if I pronounced that correct, but I'm sure you'll correct me. And now she's helping museums reach a whole new generation of audiences. So, Maria, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal journey into the world of museums and digital storytelling.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy and Warren, for
Yay.
having me today. Super excited
Lovely.
to chat. Thank you. I came about to the museum world kind of a non-traditional way. I studied wildlife biology and was very much interested in the birding specifically, or birds. And I was involved in a wildlife museum on campus. So I did a lot of the curatorial work, and the few chances I had to connect with people on those public tours kind of lit a light bulb.
Mm.
And I just loved seeing the learning happen in person. And even then, I wasn't sure I was going to go into museums. But after graduating, I found my first job out of college at a science center, did the same thing, talking to people, loved it, ended up volunteering at a couple other places, still not realizing that this was meant for me. And I eventually made it to the marketing team at that same science center. And I absolutely loved marketing and having fun with, creativity and getting different messages out. And that's why I'm here now. A couple years ago, I had the opportunity to work again with my now co-founder. She was also at the Science Center. And it was this career crossroads for both of us. And we took it. And we're here now.
And tell us about some of your clients. Who are some of the clients that you're working with?
Yeah, currently we're doing a lot of work with the Computer History Museum. So they're in Mountain View, California. Absolutely incredible museum. They have a super robust collection online. So they have a lot of their exhibits digitized, and their YouTube is super robust. So they have a lot of archival footage. They have some exhibit footage on there, a lot of panel sessions. So we came in to work together with them on developing a social media strategy, and found a few, I mean, it's longer than this, but found some main topics, content buckets, and started developing a lot of content that way. Figured out where their target audience had their big interests. And so we've been working a lot with them to continue growing their social media organic side of things. And we've done a little bit on YouTube with them. We started diving in and trying to figure out where, those same content buckets are on YouTube, maybe doing some optimization. So there's a few different things going on with them. Initially, when we founded Send It Social, we started working with nonprofits. So that was our big thing, was to work with organizations whose missions we really believed in. And so, we were passionate about the work they did, and we helped them get their message out. So we're still working with a couple there. Yeah, I think that covers it for now. Those are the big ones.
So I have a question for you, actually. Museums, nonprofits as well. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of opportunities for storytelling there. How do you find the relationship with social media and all of the stories that are inherently in the museum? And I'm always curious about the museum, or your feelings about in-person visits versus digital online social visits, and how that matters, and the value of it to museums and different organizations.
Oh, that's an awesome question. So many things just went off, so I'll try to stay on one road right now.
We're good on
Um,
5.
Yes.
the word digital comes to mind. I don't know if you've heard that. I've seen it pop up a few times, that mix of physical and digital. So I think the physical aspect of museums specifically, I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think the core of the museum experience is standing in front of an artifact and, just really taking it in. And there's so much to that. But I think we all realize, and maybe this is said a lot now, right? But after the pandemic, that famous word, we all pivoted, and realized really how important it is to be in the digital space, and meeting people where they're at. And I think museums as a whole now are, and have been for a while, but especially now, are really working to open up their doors and make their spaces more accessible, inclusive to people who wouldn't make it normally to their institutions. And that can be for a variety of reasons. So social media is one of the key spaces in that digital landscape that museums can really, really benefit from being active on. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. The number I last saw is definitely over half the people in the world are on social media, and I think they spend like 2.5 hours, something like that, on social media every day. So museums do have like a big opportunity to reach audiences and have this new touch point with their mission. And then the other thing I was going to add to that is social media is not, it's not your typical marketing, like promotional channel. I think people took it that way a lot, especially in the beginning, where it's like, buy this, come check out this. The way I heard it phrased one time, which I really liked, was treating social media like going to a cocktail party and talking to people that way. You're not going to go up to someone and be like, you should like go here, or you should, buy my product. But instead, like cultivating relationships and telling like interesting stories, and people will start gravitating to you eventually if you keep doing that. I don't know if there was more I could add to that, Warren, please let me know. But yeah, there's just
No, that's a lot.
Yeah, museums are they're ripe with content, and they're perfect for social media. People are looking to be entertained. If they're not connecting with family and friends online, they're scrolling, they're looking at new ideas. Yeah, museums are built for it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess museums, I mean, obviously the intention is they want to get somebody in there. You're right. The artifact and interacting with the artifact is what a museum is really all about, and that's never going away. But there's also the reality that a lot of times people are not going to end up at a museum in some city unless they visit it. And not everybody in the world is going to end up in the museum. So I think it just gives you that much opportunity to reach out to so many more people and create those connections.
Totally. Yep. And I think also for people who don't see themselves as, I'm reading this book by Jennifer DeSalle. It's called Art Curious. It's really cool. It talks about all these the stories behind different artworks and such. And she talks about in the beginning how not everyone, or she herself did not see herself as someone who loved art in the very beginning. And it wasn't until she heard all these really interesting stories that she completely fell in love with it. And so there's a point to be made there. I think a lot of people don't even realize they're museum people, and maybe they have this perception of museums as stuffy institutions, the way it might have been in the past. But I think we're seeing a lot more museums telling their stories and creating all these connection points for people, making them relevant. Yeah.
I think that's such a good point. It's my dad is an artist and a painter, and dragged my brother and I around to every art museum in the universe when I was a child. And I grew to almost not like it because it's boring when you're a kid. But what I realized is he wasn't putting in the effort. No, that's not the right word. It was not available to them at the time to do the docent-led tours, at least with children in tow. And I think a lot of museums have come a lot farther in making it accessible to families. But now that I'm traveling, a docent-led tour is a game changer for getting engaged with a museum, because you get those stories and you get that background. And so when we took our kids to Spain and France for the first time 5 or 6 years ago, we did the coolest docent tours at like the Prado and, all over
Wow.
Paris. And it was just, my daughter was so engaged with the way that they explained what was happening with these famous paintings that she had seen on websites or wherever she had seen them. But she also carried around a little sketchbook and was doing little sketches of the paintings. It was just, my husband and I's little hearts were thumping because we were so proud of her engagement and interest.
Yeah.
But it just reminds you that the telling of those stories is so important, that people connect with something when you know its history, whether that's other humans or that's the artworks or those are historical artifacts. It's not important unless you understand that piece. Social offers such a unique way to sort of help do that. So I'm curious how you go into a museum that you're working with and tie the pieces of their collection to what's actually relevant and trending on social media. Sometimes it feels like there's a great divide between, the actual storytelling and meat of something and then the banality of social media trends.
Sure. And I think there's, like, in general, we focus a lot on the evergreen content. So things that can live on and, someone down the line runs into it, even if the trend or a trend is long gone, they'll still
Disappears,
identify. Yeah, because they're
fair,
ephemeral.
yeah.
They come and go, right? And there is a place for trends. I think if museums, say for example, there's a TikTok trend, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, but
Yes.
something, and because they go so fast, there's something, and a museum finds a really creative way to like tap into it and put their own spin on it. I think that can be really fun, as long as it's not like, there's a lot of trends that can be surface level, but I think if a museum puts their own like it ties into the museum, I think that's cool, and
Yes.
I think that's really unique, and it does, like, I think people see it and are like, oh my god, like, that's smart. I see what they're doing. But in general, I think a good story is a good story,
Yeah.
and I think that's the route we typically take when we're looking to make content. Take the Computer History Museum, for example. We look at their blogs, we look at YouTube, maybe we look at which of their web pages are getting the most traffic that month, and we kind of build stories around those initial sources. And there's a lot to be done there. And, you can tie that into current events sometimes. Like the Macintosh's 40th anniversary was earlier this year, forgetting the month. But they had a whole campaign around that. And so we started doing some organic content, showing historic footage of the Macintosh being revealed. And, not everyone knows that it was the Macintosh's 40th birthday, but the people that did like latched onto that. Yeah. So in general, we definitely go towards evergreen content. But like I said, trending content can still be fun. And I think a good way to use trending content is like art memes. You see a lot of institutions doing that. They're super fun. This lady, Jennifer DeSalle, that I mentioned, she had in her book about people not being able to connect with pieces until they see like that relatable aspect of it. And I think especially art memes are a really good way to connect with a contemporary audience, where you see something you understand right away, right? And if a museum has their spin on it, it just makes it that much more like relatable. There's a meme actually going around right now on it's the baby. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a baby, and it says something like who's ready to go to the Orlando resort or something like that. I just saw the Getty.
I saw that yesterday. The Four Seasons, the Orlando Four Seasons. Yeah.
Yes. And like the Getty, I saw their post the other day or yesterday. I mean, that's a really quick and easy way, and you're showing your own artifacts too. So
And
I
it's
didn't
also
see the
showing that you're
Getty's
paying
response to
attention.
that.
And it was sorry.
Yep.
It also shows you're paying attention to, what's trending at the time.
Yes.
It's like a fun way of doing things.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like literally there's no way to keep up with everything. I mean, you could be online forever. So yeah.
So when you're working with a museum, do you normally have an internal counterpart who's doing the more trendy in the moment stuff, and then you guys are producing the evergreen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does work like that because my co-founder and I are remote in most of what we do. We do take on the content that's offsite, for example, and so our counterpart, which can be a social media manager or even someone on their marketing team, they typically take on any like in-house, like if they're featuring a volunteer, for example, like filming their volunteer stories, or trending content. Exactly.
How do you account for if you're going on? So do you go on site to do content capturing and get photography, videos, things like that? Or are you relying on what's in their archives and what they've kind of got access to?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what they have access to. The work we've done, we've been lucky. They've had a lot of things on the website or, in a drive folder, and we can access it that way. We have done a couple content capture trips, which are always super fun. And we get as much as we can and work off of that. But yeah, like I think it's already important for museums to have their collections accessible digitally, and I get that can be like a big undertaking. So if they don't, like working towards that is always good. But if they have stuff online, it's easy for us to work off of it. But we've done a mix of things.
Warren and I like to hear that, because that means they need to have a really strong website before you can do great social. It's kind of the base, right? I mean, it's like your home base for everything else that branches out from there. And so having that great presentations of the exhibits online, great library and archive of the ephemera and the elements online, I think is so important. So I love that.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem, right? Like you have
It
all these
is.
different places, and yeah, if one place is built up, it just makes it that much easier for the other place for people to bounce around.
Yeah, Andy's right. Obviously, I have my own vested interest in that we build websites. So I'm always like to see an organization with have a great website or not have a great website, so they want to work with us. But
Yeah.
but all kidding aside, I think it's important. Like, I mean, social media is what creates the connection, and then you're hoping that somebody will then delve deeper into that online area that the museum or the organization owns itself, that they curate, that they actually take care of.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, I look at the website as sort of this base, and then we do a lot of the marketing, that's the content creation that's more long form, so blogging and things like that, SEO, a lot of paid media, and then social feels like the sort of icing on that cake, and it's what's sort of bringing people deeper into the layers, so they can work their way down to getting increased engagement, which I think is all really useful. So I'd love to hear if you have any examples you can think of museums or creators doing really neat things in the space that we could check out.
Yes. I'll start with, you just featured him, Nick from the Tank Museum. That's like the holy grail. As far as like museums joining the digital space and really making like their audience a part of it, I think that's a great example to look towards. Yeah, and you can talk about the revenue too, which is, I'm sure all museums are excited to see that example. I mentioned the Getty. The National Gallery of Art in the US has some really awesome social media content. I think museums, when they think of social media, there's this tendency to think of it, maybe less so now, but there was a tendency before, at least with TikTok, to think of it as this really silly app where everyone's dancing, not so much the case anymore. There's still that, but there's this looming thought about, well, how is my brand going to be perceived? Like, the museum is still a respected place of authority. And I say that in in a good way, right? Where you have all these artifacts and they're in charge of like linking people to the past, present, and future. So anyways, how their voice would be perceived on social, when they want to connect with people at the same time and make lighthearted content. The National Gallery of Art, I think, does a fantastic job of doing that. Like, you'll see their carousels, they have some memes, where they're still very like, I'm trying to think of the word. It's not formal, but it's still very like, it looks legit. And they're still really funny, like, or really interesting. So that's, as far as brand voice goes, that's a good one. I think a lot of museums are, we talked about digitizing their collections and putting things online and, giving people the accessibility, and then they can go off on their own and work with items. I think a lot of them are doing that. I had an offshoot thought with that. The Gaze Art, it's the Gaze_art.
Yes, we've heard about
Instagram.
that a couple times.
Oh my gosh, I keep bringing them up. They have some fantastic content. It's not a museum, but I think it's a very cool example for museums to look at in terms of storytelling. And they use like all these high resolution images, and the videos are just beautiful. And there's carousel posts too, but those are really cool social media posts. I've also seen museums like ACMI in Australia who have, and that's the Australian Center for the Moving Image, or I think that's what it stands for.
Yeah.
But they have some digital experiences, and then because they're the center of the moving image, they have like films that people can like stream online, like a digital cinema, which I think is super cool. I don't think we can access it being out of the country. There's some really cool stuff being done. Yeah, off the top of my head, I think those are the ones that stand out right now.
Yeah. That's good. Gives us some more content to go follow for sure. I love that.
Yeah.
So when I think about the National Gallery, or I think about the Smithsonian, I know because we work with some Smithsonian affiliates, the resources are deep. And
I'm sure.
I'm curious how you work with smaller museums and organizations that have not so deep resources. Is there any secret sauce that you as an agency could impart to small teams who have to DIY themselves? Like how could they be planning their content better and producing better content on social?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first step is to take a step back and just kind of like review what you do have. And, you know, I briefly mentioned content buckets, just developing a strategy to guide you going forward. It does not have to be like, even if the content, or I guess the range of the collection is not as deep, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
There's other ways to go about it. You can play off of the stories of the staff or the volunteers themselves, like, you know, maybe how they connect to a piece could be something like the curator led almost like docent tours where they talk about specific pieces or even like tapping into your visitors. The Huntington has, I think it's the Huntington has done some really cool videos. They had a corpse flower, you know, that plant flowers,
Oh,
it
yeah.
smells really bad. There was a series where they were interviewing people as they walked past it and asking them what the smell reminds them of, and that was hilarious. Like, just like, yeah, creating user generated content, so you can tap into your visitors too, I think, and let them tell their stories, and you're still sharing a diverse amount or set of stories, which is cool.
Yeah.
There's different ways to go about it, if you know, compared to the Smithsonian, which I'm sure is like
Yeah, I just know that they have, you know, multiple team members working on every single role. And so it's hard to do that when you've got a small museum that's got 3 marketers and, you know, they're all stretched very thin. It's how do they prioritize and focus their time? Like, you know, what's the best use for their time? So it's always good.
Yeah, I know that's a common struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the benefits for a small museum to latch onto is that people don't expect high value, like high performing content on social media. In other words, things can be fleeting. It doesn't have to be high production value. It can just be something that you pass through.
That is so true.
100% agree. I think, in fact, I think janky content does better because people like, I do. Yeah. I think people are craving, or I know they crave authenticity. That's like, it's stated and people have said it. And so when you do highly produced content, at least on social media, there's this perception sometimes, not always, that it's an ad, depending on how you do it, because you can still have highly produced content. Like I mentioned, the National Gallery of Art, more so in their images, it's still very high resolution and all of that, but it does translate well. Yeah, no, I think the more authentic, even lower production, like it does not have to be high production. People will relate to it. And it just looks more native to social media.
Yeah, that's true. Publish before perfection has always been sort of my approach. And I think unfortunately, well, I see this because, you know, I have a team and the team, the younger team members who often are the social media folks who get hired at, you know, institutions, while they're very creative, they're sometimes afraid to take too many risks. They don't want to fail because they're just starting their careers and whatever that looks like. And I think social media is one of those places that you have to be willing to take those risks, and you have to be willing to publish things that they might fail and they might not land, and, you know, that sort of thing. But I think that's one of those things that from a culture perspective is so important that we instill in anybody who's producing our content that, yes, just try it. You know, as long as you're not breaking any rules, as long as we're not sticking within our core values, right? We're staying true to ourselves and our integrity. We've got to be able to take some risks. So
definitely. Yeah. Risk taking is so great on social media, right? You have your limits, but
you have to.
You're not going to find, people will latch on if they see something innovative. Like you're in a sea of content, you really are. And so if something stands out and you have to experiment to see something stand out, you can get great returns with that.
I think the thing we all forget is that if something doesn't work, you can always hit delete. You know, like,
it's true. Yes. Or you just keep like some posts are just not going to perform, and that's fine. Like, you know, we've had it where we create a video and sometimes they're like, wow, we put so much work into this. It still looked janky at it. But like you really like planned it out and you think it's going to land so well.
Yeah.
And compared to something that took way less time, like the really simple edits can take off. Like you really don't know until you experiment.
Yeah. Keep publishing. That's true. So do you have any tips or advice for aspiring young museum professionals that are interested in working in the museum field?
Yes, I saw this question. I loved it. And I think one of the best things you can do is volunteer or just
Mm.
spend time like at the very like public part of a museum, you know, like where you're talking, where you're seeing guests come in and have that in-person experience. I think that's where it like clicks what the museum's mission does and like, you know, how people engage in person. I don't know, it sparks this really beautiful moment. I think it did with me at least. And that's what got me to work in the museum field. The science center I used to work at used to do what were called infusions. So like the people who typically worked in the offices would have the chances to go work um you know, on the floor and like help people out and stuff. And I thought that I heard
Yeah.
really good things about that too. Um, and I think just talking to people, you know, once you're in the museum field, even if you're not, I guess, talking to people and networking and just really getting to know everyone's perspective. I could see back when I was in the science center that there it's very easy for different departments to get siloed and just like really focus in on like their work. And I think we see this in museums where the work can be overwhelming sometimes. And sometimes, you know, people take on a lot of duties that are on top of their role. Like, so everyone's very focused. And I think if you step out of your department and speak with others, throughout the museum, you see all these things and you're like, oh my gosh, we could have been collaborating this whole time. Like,
No.
so definitely talking to people and just putting yourself in those spaces would be my tip.
Yeah, get yourself out there. It's so funny, but you just clicked for me. That's exactly the thing that I feel like marketers need to do more of. They need to have a great relationship with every single department at their organization, no matter what the
That's good advice.
organization is, because that's how
Mhm.
they find the stories. And
Yeah.
we don't realize how innately boring some people think their jobs are, but would be so wildly fascinating to somebody on the outside who has no idea these things were happening. I know we worked with an art museum in Florida, and we were talking to one of their curators, and she was telling us the story of they had just acquired a new piece, and she gave us the whole story of how they transport the piece and all the decoy U-Haul vans and
Wow.
all of the like triple driving situation so that they could never stop for gas. Nobody could ever get out of that. Like if they stopped for
Hmm.
gas, no one could get out of the vehicle. There was always like 3 people with eyes on the vehicle at all times. But there's like 5 different vehicles so that nobody knows which one has the piece in it.
Oh
If
my
they did
gosh.
see somebody
Wow.
leave, and it's because these are priceless pieces of art, you know. And so it just, that to me, like, you don't want to show that stuff publicly, but sharing those stories sometimes just, I was like floored. She's like, Andy, we do this like every 2 months. We're doing that. I'm like, that's
Wow.
so interesting. Like, why aren't we telling that story? It's
Yeah.
so
No.
cool.
Completely. Yes, exactly. And I think also there's that curse of knowledge sometimes, especially with like the
Yes.
experts in different departments where maybe they're very passionate about what they do, and rightly so. And it takes someone else to hear their story to phrase it in a way that can translate on social media, for example. Like
Yeah.
I think sometimes either you don't know, like in that example you just mentioned, you don't know that you have like gold.
Yeah.
Or the way you phrase it is maybe not translating. Yeah, I think getting different perspectives is extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's been really lovely talking to you.
Yeah, I had so much fun. I'm like bouncing off my time.
Well, I'm good because it's so early in the morning for you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Lots of energy.
If people want to find you online, how can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find our website at senditsocialmedia.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, pretty active there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those are the 2 main ones. We have our Instagram at senditsocialmedia, which we post some fun content every now and then.
Oh, I've got to go check that out.
But yeah, I had so much fun. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Warren. This was really fun.
Thank
For
you,
sure.
Maria.
And I will second, you should go follow Maria on LinkedIn because her content is
Yeah.
fantastic and just always a great perspective and insight into what's going on in the world of museums and social media. So thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.